Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Hack. In this video, you're checking out an updated solo Magicka Sorcerer for the Dragonhold DLC. If you're looking to solo your way through bosses, dungeons, even veteran dungeons, then this is the build for you. Magicka Sorcerers have great survivability, strong shields, great damage and healing, and it's just so much fun to play. As usual, we'll check out the stats, the gear, we'll talk about skills, champion points, check out the outfit style, and more coming up next. Alright everybody, here we are back on the solo Magicka Sorcerer PVE build. Thought it was time to update this one. Now we'll jump into the stats first, as usual, but of course keep in mind this is a solo build for ESO. It's not a pure damage, not a pure DPS build. So our stats are going to be slightly different. We need to talk about max health. We need to talk about sustain. We need to talk about defensives. All of that stuff is important on a solo build. So keep that in mind as we check out the stats. But let me go ahead and buff up here. Use our potion. And we'll check out the baseline stats. So coming in at about 40k max Magicka, about 19k health, which is going to be very good for soloing, and 15k max stamina, also great for soloing. You need to roll dodge, you need to be able to block. As far as our recoveries, we got 1000 Magicka recovery, about 400 health recovery. This can actually go up quite a bit depending on the food, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And then stamina recovery is looking good at about 800. For our spell damage, since we are a Mag Sorc, coming in at about 3,400. Now we also have a back bar Berserker glyph, so we'll be sitting nice at about 4k total buff spell damage. Spell critical coming in about 63%. And then of course our resistances do go up with our armor buff, sitting at about 20k spell and physical resistance. And this is for a light armor build, so that's pretty good as far as resistances in light armor. Now we have 64 points into max Magicka. I am using the Mage Mundus Stone. We'll talk about this more in a minute. This basically helps me get the most out of my jewelry traits. I'm using Tri-Stat food here. I definitely recommend this on most solo builds. Again, for that extra health and that extra stamina, very, very good. Now, if you have access to it, you can use Bewitched Sugar Skulls for even a little bit more max stats, but plus you'll get the health recovery thrown in, which is going to really help with our heals over time. So I definitely recommend that gold food if you have access to it. If not, the purple quality Tri-Stat food here is very good as well, and it's super cheap. We've got Major Prophecy, we've got Minor Protection. We'll talk about these buffs in a minute. The potion here, best in slot potion will be the good old Tripot. That's because it helps us keep up all three resources pretty well. And then for the race here, I went with the Breton. Breton, of course, has the good max Magicka pool. You get extra spell resistance, you get some extra bonus Magicka recovery, and then of course the cost reduction. All of your Magicka skills cost 7% less. So this is really good when it comes down to sustaining. Although honestly on the Mag Sorc we're doing a lot of heavy attacks. We're running Elemental Drain. So the sustain even without this is not bad. So feel free to use another race of your choice. Of course High Elf you'll get more spell damage, so that's a very good option as well. Dark Elf 2 has more spell damage, so you can use what you prefer there. Alright, so I think that covers the basics. Let's go ahead and jump into the gear sets next. Starting with our first 5-piece set, it's going to be the New Moon ACOLYTE set. If you don't know this one yet, this is a new crafted set from the Dragonhold DLC. This is 9 traits to craft in Southern Elsewhere, and it's a great, great set. You have spell critical, you have spell damage, spell penetration, as well as almost another 500 spell damage. There is a downside, of course, that this does increase the cost of your active abilities by 5%, but I really don't feel it much on this build at all. You know, if you're using Breton as your race, you already get 7% reduced cost, which is more than 5%, so I think it's fine. Now, I did decide just to run this on my front bar, and that's going to mean that I have that spell damage buff active on the front, without the extra cost on my back bar abilities. So I think that is the best way to run this on a Magicka Sorcerer. So I'm using Nirnhond here as the trait on the Lightning Staff. Of course, I've got the shock damage there on the front bar. Enchant. Sorcerers have bonus shock damage. And then I'm simply running 3 more pieces on the body Now, of course, you could craft 3 pieces of jewelry as well, but I just figured 3 body pieces to go along with the staff would be the easiest. So I'm using the robe here, legs, and feet. So for those body pieces, I have all divines, all max magicka. So that covers the front bar set. Then for your second 5-piece set, I find that Magicka Sorcerer still does really good with a lot of crit. For example, our healing does depend on crit damage, so having a nice high crit chance is very good on a Mag Sorc. That's why I went with the Mother Sorrow set for our second 5-piece. This gives us a nice bit of bonus max magicka, and then just tons of spell critical here for the 3, 4, and 5-piece set. That's what's getting us about 64% spell crit on the build by running this. So I am using 2 pieces of Mother Sorrow on the body, and then just 3 jewelry. It doesn't really matter how you run this. You can run the jewelry of Mother Sorrow. You can choose to craft the New Moon Acolyte jewelry. It's really up to you. It's probably going to depend on if you have a crafter or not and what traits they can craft. But it is very easy, I found, just to buy Mother Sorrow on Guild Traders. And then what I would recommend is just changing the traits. So what I found to be the best in slot traits for soloing is having 1 infused and having 2 bloodthirsty. Now, why the bloodthirsty? Well, we're doing a lot of heavy attacks on the solo build. We also are focusing a lot more on dot pressure. So I'm actually not running an execute ability on my Mag Sorc for soloing. And so I found that if I just run some bloodthirsty traits, that basically takes care of that extra damage in execute range, and I don't have to think about it. So I love the bloodthirsty trait. So I do have 2 of those, and then I wanted my spell damage to still be high, so I'm running 1 infused. And then, of course, all of these enchants are spell damage. You shouldn't have to worry about recovery as long as you're heavy attacking properly. As long as you're maintaining your elemental drain, then sustain is not an issue on this build, so you can run full spell damage, no problem. Now for the last set, our monster set, of course, I'm going to recommend the Ice Heart set. This gives you spell critical, which again is going to be great on the Mag Sorc. That's going to help our healing. And then anytime we do crit damage, which is all the time, we're going to get this nice damage shield for 6 seconds. It also does AoE frost damage, and it refreshes itself every 6 seconds. So you'll basically always have this damage shield active as long as you are doing damage, which is great for soloing. I love damage shields that you don't have to think about. It makes it very, very easy. Now, the tooltip is still incorrect. This will scale up with your champion points, which we'll talk about when we get to the champion point setup. So as far as our traits and weights and enchants here, on a Breton, I'm going to recommend running 2 max health pieces. So I have a max health enchant on my head, max health enchant on my chest. That gives me about 2,000 max health. Gets us to around that 19k health mark. If you don't feel like you need that much, you can probably just run 1 health enchant and be fine. That would give you about 18k health. I definitely recommend at least 1 health enchant. And the rest is just going to be max magicka enchants. If you can get divines on all your traits, divines is going to be the best in slot trait for these. In terms of our weights, we are doing 5 light, 1 medium, and 1 heavy. You can make those extra pieces from your monster set. Or if you're doing crafted New Moon, you can actually craft a heavy chest. Just to make it easy here, I went with a heavy helmet and a medium shoulder piece. That's going to give us the most stats possible if we have access to undaunted passives on the build. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the back bar weapon. If you want the best option, I think that's going to be the Maelstrom Staff. Now, I realize not everybody has access to this, but if you do, this is going to be ideal, because what this will do is it will buff both your light and heavy attacks. That's to any enemy that's standing in your Wall of Elements. We are going to be using Wall of Elements on the build, and we are doing a lot of heavy attacking, so this just really synergizes well with what we're trying to accomplish on the build. Try to get it infused. Definitely get it with a Berserker enchant. That's going to scale up to about 500 extra spell damage every 5 seconds, and you should be able to keep that up 100% of the time, like I said, with Wall of Elements. Now, if you don't have this staff, that's still fine. What I would recommend in that case is just pick up a Willpower Staff. For your Willpower bonus, you'll get a nice bit of max magicka, and that's going to help even out our max magicka because we have less magicka on the back bar due to some of the buffs that we're running on the front bar. So again, best choice, Maelstrom Staff if you have it. Backup choice, look at a Willpower Staff. All right, moving on to our skills next. Let's go ahead and start with our front bar lightning staff. This is going to be the New Moon ACOLYTE staff. Now I've tried to make this build as simple as possible. It's going to still focus a lot on heavy attacks, a lot on dot pressure, because I find that's really the easiest way to solo in this game, especially on a Mag Sorc. Just apply your dots, keep your shields up, and heavy attack. That means you'll have no issues at all with sustain. You'll still be doing strong damage. So for our first ability, I'm using Bound Aegis. This is from the Daedric Summoning skill line. It's the last skill you get. And what this does is it just increases your max magicka, and it gives you some extra physical and spell resistance. So it's basically just a passive buff, makes your heavy attacks hit stronger, and that's basically what we want. So second skill is going to be Inner Light. This is from the Mages Guild skill line. This is the first ability you get in the Mages Guild, and it's very similar to Aegis. It gives you max magicka by 5%, and it also gives you a nice passive buff. You need this buff on a Magicka Sorcerer. If you don't have this from Inner Light, you'd have to use potions, and we really don't want to do that. We want to use tri-stat potions if we can. So that's why I love having this slotted on the front bar. You also get some additional passives from having this slotted, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, next up, we've got Hardened Ward. This is going to be our damage shield. You do need a very strong damage shield on a Magicka Sorcerer in order to solo. This is what makes the Mag Sorc such a great solo class in the Elder Scrolls Online. You have one of the best damage shields in the game, Hardened Ward. This is also from Daedric Summoning. It's the second to last skill you get. I prefer the Hardened Ward Morph because it is a stronger shield. You can see it scales to 60% of your max health. So try to keep this up as much as possible. It does last for 6 seconds. If this drops early, you may want to recast this. Though if you already have your Ice Heart damage shield active, you can actually wait till that starts to go down and then cast this. So you can kind of rotate those damage shields if you don't need the full damage shield strength. But this shield combined with that Ice Heart set, combined with some of the other passives we have on this build, we can easily have more damage shield than we have health, which is really nice. Next up, Structured Entropy. This is also from the Mages Guild skill line. Structured Entropy is the second skill that you get. Gives you a nice dot there. You can see about 16k unbuffed magic damage over 12 seconds, while also giving us a nice passive heal. This is going to synergize really well with the passive healing of the Sorcerer. And the cost is also quite low, which is very nice. When you're soloing, we also get some nice passives from this ability, so I definitely recommend that. And finally, on the front bar, we have yet another magicka dot. This is Consuming Trap. Consuming Trap is from the Soul Magic skill line. So damage here is similar to Entropy, not quite as strong, but the reason why I like this is for the potential sustain. You can see when an enemy dies, and you have this dot on them, you restore almost 8k max magicka and 3k stamina, as well as health. Now, the sustain you get back depends on your max health, max magicka, and max stamina. That's why we're getting almost twice the magicka back that we do stamina. But I find this to be very nice when soloing, especially for the stamina back. Your stamina pool is incredibly important when you're soloing in ESO. You need to be able to block. You need to be able to roll dodge. And if you get a couple of Consuming Traps off on, let's say, maybe some ads or some minor enemies in the area, it will keep all your resource pools topped off. So it's very nice for sustain. It is a dot as well, so that just means it's very easy to cast it and keep it on the target. Now for our ultimate, you do have some options here. What I prefer, if you have access to it, is going to be Temporal Guard. This comes from the Psijic Order skill line, which comes with the Somerset chapter, so I realize not everybody has this. But if you do, definitely pick this up on a Magicka Sorcerer for the extra passive minor protection. That means you reduce all incoming damage by 8%. Doesn't matter if it's a boss heavy attack, doesn't matter if it's AoE damage, dot damage. This is going to reduce all incoming damage by 8%. So I'm not using this as an active ultimate. I'm using it purely for the passives here, which are great for staying alive on the build, basically. Now, if you don't have this, another great option for your ultimate front bar would be Shooting Star. This does really nice AoE damage. You also get some ultimate generation. And you get those nice Mage Guild passives. So if you don't have Psijic Order, think about Mage's Guild for that one. But I prefer Temporal Guard, of course. Now let's go ahead and swap to the back bar, which is our Lightning Staff. I have a VMA staff. You can also run the Willpower here. Starting off with Elemental Drain. This comes from the Destruction Staff skill line. It's the second to last ability you get. Just morph that to Elemental Drain. This gives us Major Breach. What that does is it reduces our enemy's spell resistance by 50 to 80 for 23 seconds. Now, I'm not going to use this on AoE trash pulls or things like that. I'm going to reserve this mostly for boss fights because I want to get their resistance down as much as possible. And not only that, but this also applies minor Magicka Steel to that boss. That means you're going to get 300 Magicka back every 1 second when you're doing damage, which considering you have dots and AoEs, should be doing damage every 1 second. So this is basically 600 Magicka recovery equivalent on your stat sheet. This is so good for soloing any Magicka character in ESO. I definitely recommend picking this up. Next up, we got another Destruction Staff ability. That's going to be Elemental Blockade. Now, the damage on this isn't super good anymore. It did get changed quite a bit. The reason why we're doing it, though, is for the status effect and the glyph. Remember, we are running an Infused Berserker enchant, so this is giving us 500 extra spell damage every 5 seconds, which is great. You really want that buff. But the other nice thing, since we are using a Lightning Staff, is we can set our enemies off balance. And what off balance does for a solo build is it allows you to do more damage through your CP passives. And then if you heavy attack an off balance enemy, you also get twice as much Magicka back on your Lightning Staff. Now, most bosses do have a cooldown of about 15 seconds, so you can't have them off balance 100% of the time. But I find that off balance proc every 15 seconds is really, really good for sustain. So that's another great reason to run this skill. Next up, we've got another Psijic Order ability. We're running Channeled Acceleration. This is the third ability you get in the Psijic Order skill line. Now, I prefer the Channeled Acceleration morph. The other morph is more of a PvP morph, in my opinion. I would recommend Channeled for PvE builds. What this does is it gives you Major Expedition for 12 seconds, so that's great. That's some extra movement speed for running around a dungeon, running around the overland, things like that. But then why we really like it is Minor Force for 36 seconds. That's a huge buff duration. So that's giving us an extra 10% crit damage. Remember, we do have over 60% crit chance on the build. So having that extra bonus damage from our crits is really going to scale nicely. And on top of that, we also have a very important passive, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But it's really nice if you can to run a Psijic Order ability on both bars. So finally, in terms of our buffs, we are using Crit Surge on the back bar. This gives us Major Sorcery, so that's a 20% buff to our spell damage. Plus, look at that passive healing. This is what we want on a solo build, you guys. Every crit damage gives us about 3,500 health back, and this can happen every 1 second. This is super OP. It's healing that you don't have to think about, and that's one of my rules for soloing in ESO. You need to have constant healing coming in. And Magicka Sorcerer, even Stamina Sorcerer, has one of the best skills in the game for that. Of course, that's Crit Surge. So make sure you have this up 100% of the time. Take the Crit Surge morph. It is the better option. Now, in addition to that, we also have Boundless Storm. That's the second ability you get here in Storm Calling. And this is going to be our armor buff. Now, we do get some nice shock damage, about 1,000 shock damage. This is an AoE every 1 second. So this is very nice to help proc your Ice Heart, for example. You want to maintain that, of course. But then we also get Major Resolve. So that's that extra 50 to 80 spell and physical resist. That's what's getting us over that 20k resist mark, even on a light armor build. Of course, you have the extra movement speed. You've got that unchanneled acceleration as well, so not a big deal. Now, in terms of our ultimate, my favorite ultimate on a solo sorcerer build is always Greater Storm Atronach. We get some nice passives from this. But just look at that duration, almost a 30-second ultimate duration. We're doing 4K shock every 1 second over that 30 seconds. You can imagine how much damage this can do, not to mention the initial hit and the initial stun. But I just love this ultimate. The cost is also relatively low. So if you have enough ultimate generation, by the time this goes down after 30 seconds, you can almost have a new one ready. So I definitely prefer this. It's just passive damage. Just like our damage over time abilities, that makes it really easy to solo. Now, if you don't like this, you can run, of course, Shooting Star here. That will give you some nice burst damage, some nice ultimate back as well. But I just prefer Greater Storm Atronach. It's very fun to play with, very strong as well. Okay, so that covers the basic skills. Let's go into our passives next. Passives are extremely important for soloing. You definitely want to pick up most of these. So under Dark Magic, it's a great cost reduction passive. That's why New Moon Acolyte is pretty easy to sustain on a sorcerer. You can see this reduces the cost of all of our active abilities. Now, under Blood Magic, you can probably pass this one up. I decided not to use Crystal Frags on this build, though you could slot that on your front bar. For example, instead of Bound Aegis, you could put Crystal Frags there if you wanted, and you could get a little bit of healing back from this passive, but I decided just to skip that. Now, Persistence is actually pretty useful. You can see when you block an attack, your next ability costs 15% less. So you could, for example, block a boss heavy attack and then immediately cast your damage shield. That's going to be 15% reduced cost, so it's not bad. And then if you are using Crystal Frags, for example, on the front bar, you'll get some extra spell crit, which is very nice. In terms of Daedric Summoning, I do like most of these passives. Rebate, I believe this does apply to your Storm Atronach, so you'll get a little bit of Magicka return when that dies. But Power Stone is absolutely one of my favorite passives. This makes that Atronach cost 15% less ultimate. Very, very nice. Make sure you pick up that one. Daedric Protection, we also get bonus health and stamina recovery. That's why I mentioned if you can get that Bewitched Sugar Skulls food, you'll have almost 1k health recovery. That's going to then get buffed by 20%. So that's really, really nice. And then Expert Summoner, you might think this is useless, but since we are using the Atronach on the back bar, anytime you have that Atronach active, you'll get about 1,000 extra health, which is actually pretty cool. Now moving on to Storm Calling. These are nice passives as well. You get 10% extra Magicka recovery. Energize gives you that bonus shock damage we talked about. This even applies to your shock enchant on the front bar. Amplitude is nice when you start a fight. It gives you a 10% bonus damage when an enemy is 100% health, and it just scales down a little bit from there. So it's a very interesting passive. It's not always useful, like when a boss is in execute range, but I still recommend you pick it up for that extra damage at the start. And then Expert Mage, we actually get bonus spell damage here on each bar, depending on how many sorcerer abilities we have slotted. So currently 4% there, which is not bad. It's free damage. Now, the nice thing about running double Destro Staff is you only need passives in one skill line. Of course, that's Destruction Staff, so make sure you're picking up all of these. For example, your Shock Staff heavy attacks actually do 100% AoE damage. That means if you're targeting a boss, every enemy that's standing close to them is going to be getting equal damage to that heavy attack. So this is actually a really, really good passive. That's what makes Magicka builds so good at soloing, you guys. Basically, just pick up everything else in this passive skill line. They're all very good passives. Under Light Armor as well, pick up all of these. These are great. For example, you have increased Magicka recovery. You have 10% Magicka cost reduction, extra resistance, extra spell crit, which is amazing, and then the extra spell penetration. So make sure you pick up all of those passives. In medium and heavy armor, there are a few of these which you can get for some extra stats. In the medium armor skill line, you can get some extra stamina recovery from Windwalker. You also have extra movement speed while sprinting and roll cost reduction with the athletics passive. Very, very good. Under heavy armor, pick up the first three. This gives you increased resistances, increased health recovery, increased sustain, and then some extra max health there. What else? In terms of Fighters Guild, we aren't really using any Fighters Guild abilities, though I do always recommend Banish the Wicked. This gives you 9 ultimate when killing any undead Daedra. Under Mages Guild, this is important, you guys. We are running at least 2 Mages Guild abilities on the front bar, if not 3. So Mages Adept, this is going to reduce the cost of those abilities. Everlasting Magic gives us extra duration. Magicka Controller, this gives us bonus max Magicka and Magicka recovery. I'm getting 4% right now at the moment. And then Might of the Guild, we get Empower. Under Psijic Order as well, since we are running these, if you have access, make sure you pick up all of them. Now the main passive here that I want to point out, because it's actually kind of more like an active ability, it's going to be Concentrated Barrier. So with this passive skill, anytime you have a Psijic Order ability slotted and you block, you get a free damage shield. So it basically looks like this. I'm going to block, and then I instantly get this damage shield to pop up. Now, why is that good? Well, it stacks. Stacks with both our Hardened Ward and our Ice Heart damage shield. So this extra damage shield is amazing. This is also why I decided to use Channeled Acceleration on the back bar. That means no matter what bar I'm on, either front bar or back bar, I can block and get that extra damage shield. So in the Undaunted skill line, if you have this maxed out to 10, you can pick up the Undaunted Metal passive. This gives us 6% extra Magicka, stamina, and health. Very good to have. Under Alliance, we actually don't need to PvP at all on this build, which I know is a plus for some people. You don't need any of these skills or passives. Of course, always pick up your racial skills. Alchemy, medicinal use for that extra potion duration. Now let's quickly talk about champion points, which are very important as well when soloing. I focus mostly on a lot of recoveries, a lot of defensives on this build, as well as dot pressure. So in the green tree, we've got 26 into Warlord, 16 into Sprinter, 49 into Tenacity. This is going to help a lot with those Lightning Staff heavy attacks, giving you more Magicka sustain. 64 Arcanist, 43 Mooncalf, 23 into Healthy, 28 Shadow Ward, 20 into Tumbling. In the blue tree, we have 23 into Blessed, 44 Elfborn, 43 Elemental Expert, and 35 Spell Erosion. We also have 53 into Staff Expert. This is huge, you guys. This is increasing that heavy attack damage almost by 30% for only 50 points. This is great. This is a great CP node to have active. And then 72 into Thaumaturge as well. That's just affecting all of our dots. I believe this even is going to scale up those lightning heavy attacks, which should be considered dots as well. Then in the red tree, we got 66 into Ironclad, 43 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 34 into Thick Skinned, 39 into Light Armor Focus. This is because we have extra spell resistance from our light armor passives. So adding this just kind of helps to even out the physical and spell resistance of your build. 19 into Quick Recovery, and then 26 into Bastion. Bastion is affecting things like your Ice Heart damage shield. So if you're using Ice Heart, I recommend at least 26. You can even put more in here if you want. What else? What else? In terms of the outfit style, let's see. Everything I have here is the Elder Argonian style. You can get this from the Murkmire DLC, or you can pick this up on Guild Traders. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching and checking out the solo Mag Sorc build update for the Dragonhold DLC. As usual, there'll be a couple boss fights here at the end so you can see how the build plays and feels. If you enjoyed the video today, don't forget to crush that like button and leave a comment below letting me know what kind of solo builds you want to see next. Again, thanks so much for watching. You all are amazing. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you around in the next video.